Hello and welcome to a little chat. I say little, it could end up being quite long, who knows, where I want to talk about and tell my story about how I came to be in a relationship with astrology, in an intimate relationship with astrology. I would say pretty much lives in my head most of the time. Almost everything I see through this astrological context. And so yeah, I say very intimate relationship with astrology. And I don't have anything like planned out as far as telling this. I'm just gonna kind of do it the fun way and see where we get to. So I really appreciate y'all's questions. This was another question that I got recently where I think my preferred way of answering anything is to just talk it out. I'm not much of a writer unless the timing is exactly correct. But otherwise, I'm an open book and I'll answer pretty much any question anybody wants to ask. So this is a particularly fun one though, because I happen to be a Pisces North Node, and a water North Node in general, Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, is really about learning how to trust your emotions enough to follow your intuition. And as an Earth South Node, that could not be more difficult. So, as an Earth South Node, like, you need proof and you need evidence and you need a track record and you need contingency plans and you need like all the things that are going to make sure your physical security is taken care of, because what could be more important than that? I don't know. How about life satisfaction? How about like soul level fulfillment? Like, that's what I learned is more important than financial security. So learning how to lean into my soul level fulfillment for me has required listening to my emotions and learning how to trust my intuition. And this, how did you come to be with astrology, like, is a story of that. So that's super fun. And it also stars the North Node. So you better believe that's why I'm putting this through the Aries North Node thing, because basically when the North Node transit stepped into Gemini, and I'm going to put it here on the screen with the exact date and the transit of what that looks like. The minute it gets into Gemini, it's sitting right there with my Chiron. And not too long after, another, month or thereabouts, it's like sitting right there with my Sun. And I believe that was in June of 2020 when it entered, but again, I'll have the exact date on the screen. And it was in August. So like, I'm recording this August 15th, 2023. I'm just having my 3-year anniversary with astrology. Our relationship's going strong, better than ever. And when the North Node got into Gemini with my Chiron and my Sun, right? That would also be opposite my Saturn and my Uranus. And when that happened, I got the download in July of 2020, pretty early on in July. I'm going to say like first or second week. I'm ready for my life coach. I just like knew it in my bones. Like, I'm ready for my life coach. And I had no idea what astrology was at this point. This is July of 2020. I was running a grocery store full time at that time. I was not trying to find astrology from any direction, but I had known in my gut for pretty much all of my 20s. I'd been in and out of therapist's office like over and over and over again, seen a shit ton of therapists. And somewhere along the way in my 20s, this realization formed of like, someday I'm gonna work with a life coach. Like, I see the difference of like, what is a therapist doing and what is a life coach doing, and like which direction are you facing, and like what's the purpose of that work and how is it different. And I just knew I'm gonna work with a life coach someday. And that was really all it was. And for like a decade, I just knew that and just like didn't do anything with it, and like no action required, just I'm gonna do that someday. And then the North Node, unbeknownst to me, because I know nothing about astrology at this point, the North Node steps onto my Chiron and it tells me I'm ready for my life coach. And that was in July of 2020. And at that point, a year before that, I had made a friend, which is a whole fun story all by itself, how I even made that friend. But we had been friends for a year, and she was a life coach. She was also a massage therapist, and I think some other things. And so she was the only person who I had ever met in my life physically, which we hadn't even met physically. We were only friends over Marco Polo because she lived in a different state. But she was the only person that I'd ever met and known who was an actual life coach. And so at the time when I download, I'm ready for my life coach, she is the only person that I know into that world. And so it felt very much like the logical next step. I think I even did it the same day, to reach out to her and ask her, like, hey, I'm looking to work with a life coach. Do you have any recommendations? And she told me later that it hurt her feelings that I didn't ask her. But I was like, you're my friend. Like, you're not my life coach, you're my friend. Like, we have, I don't know. It felt weird, but that's how she felt when I asked her for a recommendation. She's like, why don't you just ask me? I could be your coach. Like, that's not what she said. That's only how she felt on the inside. What she said was, you would love my coach. And she's amazing. She does all of these awesome charts, and you're gonna love it. Like, it's just, you can't even believe how like detailed she can be with like who you really are. And I was like, great. And so I'm like, charts, I have no idea what that means. And I'm like, can you send me something? She's like, I don't really know where they are. And like, she like, didn't really have anything to show me, which I think was exactly how it was supposed to be, because in that first session, which then would have been in August of 2020, the first time I ever sit down with a life coach, not really even knowing like, really, like, what does this mean? Like, what does it mean to have a life coach? Never done it before, only knew that I wanted one. And we sit down and we start talking first, and it's probably like 20 minutes in when we get my natal chart on the screen. And at that point, she asks me, have you ever heard of a natal chart? And I'm like, no, what's that? And so she pops it on the screen. And this is the first time that I'm getting a glimpse of, this is your unique astrology chart. This is an imprint of the energy at the moment of your birth, the moment and physical location of your birth. And it is unique to you. They only repeat every like couple 100,000 years. So there's nobody on the planet that has this same energetic design as you do. And she had me from right there. Like, really, from the second she showed me the chart and she's telling me this story while I'm eyeballing the chart for the first time, something inside my entire body just went, that. Like, I don't know how to explain it other than possibly there are past life connections with me and astrology. Happened to be in June of 2020, I sat in an angel reading. This lady's name is Brenda, and I tracked down her Facebook page because I've mentioned her before. I've told this story at some other point. I couldn't think where it was, so I just am telling it again as its own thing. But yeah, so like 2 months before that, June of 2020, basically right when the node is shifting onto my Chiron, I sit in this angel reading, and during my turn, where she's gonna like specifically channel from my angels, like one of the first things, she listens for a while, and she's like kind of chatting with the angels kind of thing, and then she'll start talking to you. And one of the first things she says is like, oh, you're an astrologer. And if you're tracking the timeline, I knew nothing about astrology other than I'm a Gemini. I was going to say I'm a Gemini sun sign, but I didn't even fucking know that. I thought I'm a Gemini. That's the only thing I know about astrology. And I've always been on the fence with astrology because pop astrology, where all you're looking at is the sun sign, has always felt like, yeah, I guess I can see how I'm a Gemini, but like, that just doesn't even come fucking close to capturing like who I really am. I guess the fact that it's a two-faced thing, like it's multifaceted, I guess maybe that captures the dynamic complexity of what I got going on in here, but it really feels so inadequate. So like, that's everything I knew about astrology in June of 2020. And here's this angel reader telling me, oh, you're an astrologer. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And she's like, no, like the stars and the planets and the movement of the planets and the energy and the way that it like affects the earth and the way that consciousness evolves. Like you're an astrologer, you read this stuff. And I'm like kind of looking around on the Zoom, like if anybody else is like, no, I think she's talking about me. Like, I think these are my angels, you know, like, cause I'm like, no, I don't know anything about any of that. And then 2 months later, without even trying, I'm sitting in front of a life coach who is showing me my natal chart, telling me this is your once in a lifetime, once in, thousands of years, unique energetic imprint that belongs to you alone. And we are going to unpack it together because I had first signed up for a 7-month container. I think we ended up working together for about 1.5 years with my chart. And so that was my introduction to astrology, was 1.5 years of basically how her sessions worked. That first session, we talked about my Gemini sun and my Leo moon. And she was basically comparing and contrasting how these two luminaries, right? These are the light bodies, everything else is a planet or a point. And, the two light bodies, they do have similar properties because they're both luminaries, but the sun is our masculine principle, the moon is our feminine principle. The sun is more the core of your personality and kind of like the final decision maker at the end of the day, like kind of your top value. And the moon is more your emotional needs and the gas tank in your car and how you can make sure that you yourself personally are really well taken care of, while, even though you may choose to navigate and are really leading yourself through your sun sign. So like being a Gemini sun and a Leo moon, the Leo moon, I was like, this is a lost dimension of me. And it went along so perfectly with like Abraham Hicks had started my spiritual journey with me back in July of 2016. And their whole philosophy, I mean, you could really boil it down into follow your fun. Find what's fun for you and do that. And don't make it make sense. Don't put any logic on it. Don't need it to make you money. Don't need an instantaneous like outcome or result or impact. If it's fun, do it. And when it stops being fun, don't do it anymore. Like that's basically what she's teaching you how to do, Abraham Hicks. And so now here I am looking at my, once in a whatever unique design, and I'm a Leo moon. And what a Leo moon is saying is like, have fun, be creative, follow your creative flow. Like whatever is like moving energy in you at that time, like go into it and let yourself find kind of the downstream, the flow of timing and coming to something in the right time. And so, yeah, that Leo moon was such a huge missing piece. And so those sessions were every 2 weeks. And so like for 2 weeks, I sit there and I'm just like reading everything there is to read about a Leo moon. I'm like becoming just ensconced in Leo energy and feeling like alive, like I've never felt alive before, like just fed on a deep level. Like I had found something missing. Like my mom told me the story of the first time she ever tried an avocado. She was like 50 some years old. And she's like, Carly, when I took the first bite of avocado and I tasted it in my mouth, I felt a rush through my whole body. Like I had been missing this my whole life. And now she just like eats the fuck out of avocado. She like can't get enough. But like it felt like that, only on an energetic level. Like this was such a missing piece, this Leo moon. And I knew at the time, like, right, like I had seen the chart, like this one little piece of like this whole freaking thing. But I'm a good student and I know how to study. And so I was able to compartmentalize and do the thing where I know that there's all of this out there, but I am going to only look at this piece right now. And that was the thing about being introduced to it in the way that I was, where like every 2 weeks she's giving me like another couple of pieces usually. So like 2 pieces at a time. We went through my entire natal chart. It took about 5 months to like get through all of the pieces on that chart. And she explained it personally to me based on my specific chart. It was a magical experience to be guided in that way. Let me also tell you, it was the biggest investment that I had ever made into my personal healing journey. I spent about $4,500 on the first 7-month container to be guided through the experience like that, because that's what I was ready for. I'm ready to work with a life coach. The investment of $4,500 was not to learn astrology. It was to work with a life coach who would help me to discover in intricate detail who I really am, because that is still such a freaking question mark in my mind. So I need a container where we can really, really get specific about that. And it just so happened that that person used natal charts as a tool to facilitate exactly what I wanted. So at this point, I have been with astrology for 3 years. 3 years this month. August of 2023 is 3 years. And possibly, I definitely resonate, like in that first session when I saw my chart and like that whole angel reading moment was like right there with me, as far as she was so adamant that you're an astrologer. That's who you are. That's like what you've done in past lives, is like you're so good at reading charts and like all the different complexities and the layers of the frequencies of like all of these different archetypes. Like that's what you do. And I'm just like, I have no fucking clue what you're talking about. And so then 2 months later, here I am looking at my first natal chart and I'm like, this is what she was talking about. It was like love at first sight. That's like the best way I can describe it. And so now, 3 years later, so that was a year and a half of her guiding me. And towards the end of the year and a half, we weren't even really using the chart anymore. It felt like she had taught me everything she could teach me about the chart itself. And without that, I was like, I think this chapter of my evolution, as far as like her guiding me through learning my natal chart piece by piece, it was amazing and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, but it's over now. And so I went, I'm going to say about 6 months without a coach. And then I had a wild experience during sleep where I had a wild experience during sleep, and it caused me to seek out a natal chart reading again. I want a different astrologer. And there was one other astrologer that I did book a reading with before that, and it was a huge disappointment. It was such a disappointment that I was kind of like had just a bad taste in my mouth about booking readings with astrologers. Like if it wasn't going to be like an overtime commitment to each other, that like I don't think I'm really interested in like, basically what it was I showed up at the Zoom and then he sat there and talked for 30 minutes and I felt like I watched like an in-person video with him. And I just was like, this is not what I want. Like I need space to like discover myself, and you're just talking at me. Like that's not discovering me. And so I had this huge disappointment in the middle of these 2 experiences. And so then I had the sleep experience and I was like, I need some reflection. I need to tell this story and get a reflection. And I don't think that reflection is going to have my answer. I think that the reflection is going to let me have a reaction to the reflection. And then I'll know better, like what the hell like is going on here. I need the reflection to even see myself in the reflection, like anyways, hopefully that makes some sense. And so I sat down with this astrologer, and that was in October of 2022. And that session was so helpful. So freaking helpful. The way that she held the container of space and asked me questions, and I took up almost all the space, and when I'm done, she like asks me another question. And it was absolutely one of the most cathartic, healing, relaxing deeper into the truth of who I am. Like it felt like I was vulnerable and I put my deepest, darkest, like, oh my God, this is so scary, out there in front of her. And it was reflected with so much love and acceptance that it let me relax into those things. As like, maybe I'm not so scary and twisty on the inside. Like, here's somebody who's not like grimacing and forcing me to change. Like, this is somebody who is like, you know, doesn't sound so crazy to me. I'm like, wow, like I never even thought that was possible. Okay, like, so like definitely expanded my horizon. She happens to be a Sagittarius rising, which is interesting enough. But anyways, so that is who I'm currently working with. And she also does work with natal charts, but she includes a lot more bodies in the charts that she works with. Like, she's very into the asteroids and the vertex, and like, so she's using pieces that like were not part of the initial coaching that I received. But again, I think my intuition led me exactly through the path that it was meant to, because there was like an introduction, like a piece by piece by piece patience that, you know, my current coach is working at such depth that I don't know that I would have gotten nearly as much out of her if I hadn't been through the first coaching first. So yeah, I think, you know, astrology is a beautiful entity to be in partnership with. It's very giving. It's also very mysterious. And if you're like me and get bored really easily, astrology has a depth and like a revealing itself one piece at a time. Like, it'll give you one piece and it's like, you know, here, chew that up and swallow it and digest it for a month, and then we'll show you the next piece. So it like, I found my own healing relationship with it almost immediately after that first session with my first life coach. And that has really sustained me through to today. And so when you come into looking at like my current relationship with astrology, you know, there are people who think I'm an astrologer, and I would caution people of being so free with their trust and accreditation, because I am not an astrologer. I do not claim to be an astrologer. I might have said that on a video or two, but never has it felt right coming out of my mouth, because one, labels are so limiting, and I feel like astrologer does not cover what it is that I want to do. Like, if anything, I think healer is a much more accurate term, and astrology is just, you know, the medicine that I practice, essentially. It's medicine to understand yourself, to bring under conscious understanding of you into your world. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how you navigate through life. It changes how you treat other people and how you treat yourself in response to other people. That understanding, it spreads through your being, and it's like alchemy. It heals the broken parts. Like, I'm seeing the scene in Breaking Dawn at the end of the first movie where she like gave birth and she's basically dead, and they inject all the venom, and then you see like it's crawling through her, like healing and transforming, and that's how understanding yourself works. Is like, it crawls through your cells, it crawls through your DNA, and it changes who you are at a core level. It seeps the self-loathing away and makes space for self-love. Like, it's a beautiful language, is another way that I think about it, as far as like, again, I don't consider myself an astrologer because so much of what I've studied that comes through in this work has nothing to do with astrology. Like a huge one is Carl Jung and cognitive functions, which is the underlying theory that Myers-Briggs is based on. So the Myers-Briggs type indicator, before I became spiritual, I was obsessed with Myers-Briggs, and even more than Myers-Briggs, with cognitive functions. I wanted your Myers-Briggs type, not so that I could go read about your type, but so that I knew your functional stack, so that I could see which ones are you consciously using, which ones are in your shadow, which is your superior function, which is your auxiliary, which is your tertiary, which is your... Like, I wanted to know, like, how are you functioning inside your mind? Because again, if I can understand you, then I can navigate into your awareness and I can help you to see yourself with more loving eyes. So there is something about understanding oneself at a deep level that has always been part of my journey and part of the medicine that I personally needed to find. Like, one of my core wounds, as you know, the sun and Chiron conjunct at the very end of Gemini, one of my core wounds as I was young was feeling like nobody understands me. And there's a real part of me inside of myself that wants to minimize that and say, like, other people had it so much harder. But I think when it comes to pain, it's relative, and that was the source of mine. And so anytime, like, for example, let me give you an example of like how thoroughly this wound ran through me. It's like my mom making breakfast in the morning. I'm like maybe 10 or 11 years old, and she's like, "Here, Carly, here's some eggs," and like puts a big pile of eggs on my plate. And like, eggs disgust me. Like, eggs are the most vile thing. I will not eat eggs. And that was back then. Up until that point, I had never eaten eggs. I looked at the eggs on my plate and I looked at her, and she's like moving on down the line, like scooping eggs on my brother's plates. And I'm just like, "Mom, I don't like eggs." And she's like, "You don't?" And I'm like, No, I don't." And she's like, "Okay, well, you can make yourself some toast then." I'm like, okay, thanks. So I made myself some toast, and it was crushing. It was absolutely devastating to me that she either didn't know or momentarily like is having amnesia. That she, like, I've hated eggs from the second I can remember, and you're serving them to me like, am I invisible? Like, do I not exist? That's literally how it felt, was like to not have anybody understand me or like know who I was. Like, it felt like I didn't exist, like I must be invisible. And that is a very disorienting feeling as far as like, do I exist? I still have the mental exercise that I have to talk myself through, where I have to just let go of needing to know that I exist, because either I do or I don't. And like, I don't know. Sometimes it feels really real, and sometimes it feels like I don't think I actually exist. And the word that's coming that I've never actually associated with this is disassociation. And I do believe that that's pretty close maybe to the feeling that of like, I don't exist, I'm invisible. I don't have form, I don't take up space. I don't take up space in my mom's conscious understanding. She doesn't even know that I don't like eggs. I fucking hate them. What's happening? Is this real? Was my childhood real? Did I dream all of that? Like, it makes you question your sanity. Like, and I did. That was like the kind of the beginning of like, you know, middle school, high school, early 20s, mid 20s. Like, my mental health was a disaster in that time. And the coping mechanisms that I had at that time were just work harder, just try harder. And if anybody's ever tried that, you probably already know that like that doesn't actually work. It's just like you're driving towards the cliff and like, okay, so now you're trying harder. You're just pressing down on the gas pedal. You're just like running yourself off the cliff even faster. So eventually that led to the beginning of my spiritual journey, finding Abraham Hicks, and that gave me a different coping mechanism. The coping mechanism of finding what's fun for me and to allow myself to spend time doing what's fun for me. And instantly that meant confronting a lot of conditioning from my childhood, as far as like mostly art was seen as laziness, and like, you know, spending time doing nothing was laziness, and you're burning daylight, and you know, you could be getting so much stuff done right now, and just this achiever kind of mindset of like the only way to be valuable was how many things you finished in a day. And so like, yeah, when you're trying to follow your fun, I'm like, okay, but how do I quantify this? Do I write on my to-do list, like take a bath and draw a picture, and then I can like cross those things off? How am I supposed to do this? Like, I just like really didn't know how to exist in an unquantified way. And so yeah, it's been a long and winding road of coming home to myself, but ultimately that is why I continue my relationship with astrology, and that I have, you know, most of my Owning Authenticity channel, not all, there's plenty of stuff on there where I'm not talking about astrology. My I Learned podcast, I don't really ever even mention astrology. It's all more generalized. And again, that's very much paying tribute to the roots that I have that have nothing to do with astrology. There's way more that has helped me heal and bring me home to this point that has come from outside of astrology. But at this point, there's a reason my channel is very much circulating around specifically the North Node. For one thing, astrology itself is very complex, and I personally could roll around in complexity for all of millennia. But I do think that there is something to be said about simplifying into a single context where we can get our footing and then have a really deep conversation. The thing about simplicity is the depth of what's possible when you aren't trying to focus on a million things. You're only picking one, and then you have to sink into it layer by layer by layer by layer by layer by layer, even when the next layer is, ooh, I don't like that. I don't like facing that. That's scary. That makes me feel shame about myself. Like, whatever the case is, like this Aries North Node contemplation that we're, you know, about a month into at this point, about 30 days into, since the transit North Node shifted into Aries, at the time I'm recording this, that is, whenever you're finding it. But just even this 30 days of sinking into the Aries North Node, it's like you don't need all the pieces of astrology. Like, if there's one piece that like really resonates with you, like rising sign astrology or midheaven astrology or Venus or the vertex, or, you know, all of these different pieces that there, I mean, like the Astrology for the Soul book that Jan Spiller wrote, like she has like specialized herself mostly down into the nodes. Karen Black's website, same thing. Like, she's talking about the nodes. There are other astrologers practicing with other pieces. Like, there's one that I really like, I think her name's Natasha, who specializes in Saturn. And these simplifications, like, early on when I was learning astrology, it felt like, no, I need to understand everything. And for a time, I did branch out like in every direction of like wanting to understand everything in my chart. And the more I sat with each of the different archetypes, I have to admit that the North and South Node most closely align to the me I've always been. And it's interesting because my chart ruler and my South Node ruler are both conjunct in Gemini, along with my Sun in Chiron. So I have all four of those in Gemini. And the Venus and Mercury are squaring my nodes. And so I see that as like that kind of like third party perspective where, like, in my Gemini energy, I come stand on the side of my nodal axis And when I observe my South Node patterns and my North Node evolution, and like, it's just so undeniable how life took me on that journey, whether I understood astrology or not. It's wild how the South Node patterns unfold in our lives, whether we know astrology or not. It's comical how much people just are their South Node. And that's where I'm going to drop this invitation here as well. I've put it in one other place so far, which is I am hosting one-on-one conversations with each of the 12 nodal groups. So I am in the very early stages of this goal, but my goal is to have a conversation with an Aries North Node, a Taurus North Node, a Gemini North Node, kind of all one at a time. I don't care how long it takes. I have very limited time, so it'll have to be spaced out over a long time if I'm going to do 12 of these. But I want to sit down face to face with each of the different nodal groups and witness them in their energy, witness them in their behavior. And I am so excited to get to host these conversations and record them and put them on Owning Authenticity. So if you are an Aries North Node, you can watch the conversation with the Aries North Node, and possibly it's something like looking in a mirror, or possibly their level of awareness inspires some new awareness in you, not saying that they would be further along or anything like that, but in their portrayal of their self-expression, possibly you're able to see something within yourself even more clearly. So I don't think I have to talk to every single person for the nodal groups to benefit from me having a conversation with a representative from each of the groups. And already the second person that reached out to me that's interested in doing this has a Capricorn North Node in the 4th house. So they're opposite. The sign and the house that the North Node is pointing towards is opposite. So they have a Cancer South Node in the 10th house. So already I'm seeing like how many combinations there could really be. So I'm not even necessarily thinking like, you know, let's say an Aries North Node person reaches out to me and I already had an Aries North Node conversation. Like, chances are probably I'll do more than one on each of the nodal groups, and just kind of, you know, whoever's reaching out, whoever wants to do it, like, we'll follow that. I'm a Pisces North Node. I got to follow my flow. Follow the flow of the timing of what's unfolding, and trust that that the timing of what's unfolding is absolutely always serving the highest good of all. And, you know, that's my 12th house North Node talking of, like, that's how I release the anxiety of that Virgo 6th house South Node, is to let myself remember that my plan isn't actually the plan of what's going on, right? Like, God's plan, the universe's plan, the good of the all, however you want to talk about it, like, it's happening because the collective well-being is dominant. And so I can relax knowing that my highest well-being is part of the collective well-being. And if that means that, you know, all 6 of the first conversations are all Aries North Nodes, then I take that as that's exactly how it's supposed to work out. You know, like, this is what's in alignment with the highest good of the all. So I'm considering this an open invitation, no matter when you find it. If you want to have a conversation with me about your nodal placement that you are allowing me to put on my YouTube channel as a public video for the highest good of the all, you can reach out to me. My email address is owningauthenticity@gmail.com. Again, whenever you're finding this, even if it's 8 years from now, you can email me, and possibly we will have this conversation, because this feels like something I need to do, you know? And often as a Pisces North Node, that's all I get to know, is that I feel called in this direction. I feel like my heart is so hungry and curious for having these conversations. And if you feel like that's you, that you're like lit up at the prospect of getting to have a conversation like that, where basically you get to tell stories about how your South Node has unfolded in your life, how you've evolved into your North Node, what what's the behavior and the markers that let you know when you're kind of swirling in your South Node or when you're on the verge of expanding into your North Node? Like, I'll ask you question after question after question, and you'll get to tell your stories, and we'll share that with whoever wants to see it for the highest good of the all. Again, owningauthenticity@gmail.com. Reach out to me if you're interested. Until next time, I do thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, in this little chat about how I found astrology and what it means to me. If you've liked it, I would greatly appreciate you leaving a thumbs up on the channel. Subscribe if you're into North Node content. There's plenty more where that came from. If you're into authenticity and wanting to expand into your own and wanting a space where we absolutely confront the real life path of what it means to walk our authentic life, walk our authentic self, and how much conditioning and fear does not want us to do that. And so this space here on Owning Authenticity is a space where we get real about the layers of nuance included in basically everything, and especially in our healing journey, where we move along step by step by step. And even when we're not ready to take the next step, that just means we can be curious about what's holding us back. You know, like, not that that's anything that needs to change or be overcome, but something about a piece of us isn't on board yet. Somebody told me once that, like, you know, I was in the class I was in, I was like, the material is just so painfully slow. Like, I feel like we could be going like 5 times as fast. Like, this could be a 4-week thing, not a 10-week thing. And the guy was like, okay, but the bus can't move forward until everyone has their seatbelt on. So if you want the bus to move forward faster, perhaps you could help other people put their seatbelt on, and then we can move forward. And I was like, okay, alrighty. And me thinking I was a tutor in college, I could totally do that. And basically, like, when we feel held back, I think it's kind of the same way. Like, I think the bus can't move forward until everybody's on board. You know, and when we feel held back, perhaps that's a piece of us that hasn't really been integrated yet, hasn't really been called up out of the darkness, out of its shunning, out of its rejection, to be accepted as a piece of who we are. And I personally believe that having the intention of wanting to be our authentic self is essentially, on some level, making a promise to ourselves to retrieve every bit of who we are out of the darkness, out of the shunning, out of the rejection, into the light, into the acceptance, into the love. Wanting to be authentic is promising to excavate your shadows, to get your fragmented pieces of yourself out of there. That's not for the faint of heart, you know? And I say that because the urge to judge others is tempting, you know, as far as like, oh, they're so fake or they're so inauthentic or whatever. Like, dude, it happens to me too. To judge other people like, hey, they should be doing better. It's even more tempting to judge ourselves. You know, when we want to be authentic and we feel held back, it's easy to think I'm doing it wrong. What's wrong with me? You know, and use it as an excuse to find even more fault within yourself instead of finding less fault and inviting the, you know, rejected pieces to come up. Like, if I can't move forward on this, clearly there's a piece of me that's like tugging the rope in the other direction. And being authentic means seeing who that other part is and bringing them into the whole and making decisions to navigate from the wholeness of everything that you are. That there is no part that deserves to be shoved in the basement and locked down there for the duration of forever. No single part of you deserves that. I don't care what you did. But bringing them up out of the shadows is dangerously scary, especially when the reason they went down there is because somebody else rejected us for being that way. Somebody else taught us that that was wrong or bad or gross or inappropriate in some way. We don't become inauthentic because we were cherished for who we were. We become inauthentic because we were beaten down out of our authenticity. And standing up out of the beatdown is one of the most courageous things you're ever going to do, because what you're saying to your nervous system is, yeah, I got hit before, but I'm going to try again. And what it feels like is bracing for impact. It feels like pushing publish, but you're terrified, right? Like it doesn't always feel great to be our authentic self. And so again, the capacity for authenticity is not something that we mostly come by naturally. Like most of us didn't have role models of what it looked like to be honest at all costs, even when that meant pushback or heat or conflict. Most of us, grew up in society, and society itself, it rewards people pleasing, it rewards brown nosing, it rewards playing politics. That's where most of us came from. And so being authentic in the face of that programming is massively courageous. And for anybody who is diving into themselves, to have the intention to be your authentic self, I personally am so proud of the courage and the capacity that you demonstrate, even by setting that intention. Regardless of how it's going, regardless of how fast or slow you think it's going, regardless of you think you're failing, you think you're succeeding, I can tell you that in the moment, we cannot judge success or failure. Only time tells us those things. So that is where, again, Abraham Hicks, astrology, learning to trust my intuition and my feelings, learning to become my own authority figure, learning to trust myself more than I trust someone else, and putting all the pieces back in there, which I wouldn't say I've put them all back in there, but piece by piece by piece, the more I put in there, the more solid I am inside of myself, and the easier it becomes to trust myself. It's very hard to trust a fragmented self where all that's conscious is what I think other people want to hear, and every bit of who I really am is locked in a basement somewhere. That's really difficult. So to become consciously aware of who you really are and to have the courage to stand in your truth and authenticity, give yourself a hug for me. I am so proud of you. I'm so glad you're here. I would love it if you stuck around, but I'm gonna defer to you and your authority, and for you to trust yourself on what's right for you in the timing of your own personal evolution. And until next time, I hope you'll take really good care of yourselves, and so will I.